Okay, good afternoon and good evening, depending of the time zone. And as you may know, some are listening to us and are going to participate to our webinar from Tokyo. So I'm Marianne Peron-Doise. I'm a senior research fellow here at IRIS, and today I will chair our webinar which title is precisely Japan-France cooperation and the future of climate change. And this is, as you may know, a very timely topic because we are at a few days now from the opening of the COP 30, which is going to be held in Brazil, in Belém, from 10 to 31 of November. And the context is very specific, and we are going to elaborate a little more on this context. One element is that this conference will mark the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement and the commitment of the international community to limit global warming to below 2 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. And secondly, another element, the fact that, the outcome of the precedent COP was a bit disappointing because there were urgent call for reform of the climate talks process. And if I may refer to some, I will say, comment, declaration on the side of the organizer, meaning Brazil, they want this COP to be, I quote them, a conference of implementation following many other several COPs of commitments. And commitments will be, I think, the golden word of this and the motto of this forthcoming COP, having in mind that global temperature is rising, obviously, and also we had to deal with the withdrawal of the United States with a recent declaration of President Trump and the fact that they are not sticking anymore to the Paris Agreement. And this means that there is no more aid to help underdeveloping countries. And there is also maybe a fear that the withdrawal of the US could impact and could alter the commitment of many other participants, and that there could be a following or less involvement. So we are going to deal about that and to particularly develop some element about the cooperation of Japan, France, and EU, and the hope that we can have some constructive and positive initiative to try not to suffer too much of this withdrawal of a major partner. So the webinar will review the challenge set by this Paris Agreement, take stock of what has been achieved, and look at the climate diplomacy of many players, including France, as I told you, including Japan, and including EU. And we have three very highly qualified speakers with us to go through the subject and share their analysis with us. So in the speaking order, I will mention Sofia Kabbej. Sofia is with us. Sofia is a PhD in international relations from the Queensland University. She is an independent consultant precisely on climate change and security. And she's also Associate Research Fellow with the Climate, Environment and Security Program here at IRIS. I will mention that her thesis was on the subject of climate change and security in France, and also that she published extensively on the subject, and also on geoengineering, and maybe we will have a question about what is geoengineering. We will see. Second, to take the floor, Yukari Takamura Sensei. Thank you for being with us from Tokyo, Yukari-san. You are part of the Institute for Future Initiative from the University of Tokyo. You are very well known in France. I want to underline that because you studied at the Graduate School of University of Paris at Mines Panthéon-Assas. And you were also visiting fellow, visiting researcher at the University of London, so very close to us. Your research field include international law, environmental law, legal and governance issues related to multilateral environmental agreement, as well as climate and energy laws and policy. And you also regularly attend international conference on climate policy. So we are utterly proud to have you with us today, having in mind that it's the end of the day. In Tokyo, it's around 8 o'clock. So thank you for taking time for us. And then we will have Mathilde Jourde. Mathilde is sitting close to me in the room. Mathilde is Research Fellow, Head of the Climate Environment Security Program here at IRIS. She is also co-head of the Defense and Climate Observatory, a project funded by the French Ministry of Armed Forces. So Mathilde's research focuses on the interaction between the environment and security, particularly the security risk generated by climate change. Mathilde is specialized in issues related to natural resources, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as global north, global south dynamic in the context of energy transition. A last announcement before giving the floor to my speaker. I would like to remind the audience that you have, and you can already send some question in the chat box, and we will go back to you after the presentation of our three speakers. So I let the floor now to you, Sofia. You will have 14-20 minutes. And thank you. Thank you to stick to this time.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marianne. Can you see my screen in full screen?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for the invitation to talk about climate change governance. And I will be focusing in my presentation on the United States climate diplomacy. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll first start by coming back on the key milestones of climate change governance so that we are all clear of the history and where we're at, how it has evolved. Then I will quickly also underline the United States climate profile in terms of its contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. And then we'll turn to the US climate diplomacy. How has it stand in climate change governance? Has that evolved through time? And this will lead me to discussing probably what is of most interest for this discussion, which is the impact of the Trump administration. So Trump 1 vs. Trump 2, what has changed between the two terms? And we'll finish by underlining what does this Trump 2 administration and the withdrawal of the Paris Agreement mean for climate change governance. So just to start, coming back on some key milestones of climate change governance, the first one is the establishment in 1988 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which was and is up until now required to provide scientific foundation to guide the elaboration of climate change policies. And from when it was established until now, it's very much useful and is very much necessary to the elaboration of climate change policy. Now, 4 years later, was established the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, in 1992. And this convention is up until now the umbrella under which all subsequent agreements are adopted. And one thing I want to underline is that the establishment of the UNFCCC in 1992 was done following a very important principle, a core principle that is one of the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. So this principle is very much at the core of the construction of climate change governance up until now, and it really means that countries have different responsibilities in historical emissions, and it also recognizes that they don't have the same financial, technical capacity to respond. And we'll see in the next discussion how this is important. Now, I want to mention two key agreements, the two key agreements around climate change. The first one was the establishment in 1997 of the Kyoto Protocol. What is interesting here to underline is that the Kyoto Protocol was very much designed through a top-down approach. That is, that countries were required, and actually only industrialized countries were required to follow strict emission reduction. So really through a top-down approach. In 2015, when the Paris Agreement was adopted, we saw a really change structure, a change architecture to climate change governance that moved from this top-down approach to a bottom-up approach. So under the Paris Agreement, it is countries that are required to voluntarily submit their contribution, to voluntarily basically set their own what we call national determined contributions on their own terms. And this has really changed the spirit of climate change cooperation and climate change governments, one that is set on trust, on a collective burden that is shared, and among which it is expected that each and any country that has signed the Paris Agreement will voluntarily submit its contribution. Now, moving from those key milestones that are very important to mention, and especially the Paris Agreement, which we'll be talking after, I just want to mention and show you very quickly those two graphs so that you have in mind the United States climate profile in terms of its CO2 emissions. On the left side, you can see the annual CO2 emissions from roughly the Industrial Revolution up until 2023. This graph shows you that China is really far ahead. It surpassed the US somewhere around the 2000s. However, if you look at the right side of the screen, it shows you a different kind of picture, which is the cumulative CO2 emission. So the sum of all emissions produced from the Industrial Revolution up until 2023. And in this graph, the picture is different, right? The US is very far ahead, followed by the EU. And this is extremely important, bearing in mind the principle I underlined right before, the principle of the common responsibilities, but the shared, the common contribution, but the fact that all countries don't have the same responsibility in the problem we're facing now, and in particular, the historical emission of the US and other developed countries are very much responsible for the warming we are now experiencing. So this is important to have in mind. Now, what about the US in climate change governance? Well, the United States has, through history, showed to be quite an ambitious and quite a contributive country to climate change governance. It was the case for the establishment of the IPCC in 1998. It was the case also when the UNFCCC was established. And even with the Kyoto Protocol, it was actually an administration, so it was the Clinton administration back then. It was very much supportive of the Kyoto Protocol, but, and this is my first point, the US is also very marked by strong internal divisions. And this was exemplified with the Kyoto Protocol, which was signed by the Clinton administration, but was never ratified by Congress. So internally, there were divisions that led to having a country politically ambitious on the international stage, but having some really blocking constraints on the internal side. And this leads me to discuss a second point. Something that is very much characterizing the posture of the US in climate change governance is its refusal, its complete refusal of accepting any type of constraints from international law. And this is also something that very much explains the flexible character of the Paris Agreement, right? The Paris Agreement is one where countries are expected to voluntarily submit their contribution with no impositions, with no constraints coming top down. coming from international law. And so it's actually quite ironic to see the US now withdrawing from an agreement that its very architecture was also designed to please the US administration, and it's the fact that it asks for a lot of flexibility. And we've seen since the Paris Agreement ambitious national determined contributions, both under the Obama administration and the Biden administration, with national policies that we've probably all heard of, the Clean Power Plan Act, but also the Inflation Reduction Act, which sets those ambitious emission reduction goals, which were not met totally, but it did send a strong signal in this sense. So on one hand, we have a country that has been ambitious in terms of its contributions to greenhouse gas emission reduction, but the US has always been extremely hard on climate finance. That is, the finance that is supposed to come from industrialized countries, developed countries, to developing countries. And climate finance is very much at the core of the Paris Agreement, something that has to do with the solidarity that should come from the richest country to the poorest country to allow for their economies to mitigate emissions, but also to adapt to climate change effects. And on this matter, the US has been the hardest actor within negotiation to not push too much the financial goals and to reduce to the best of their abilities the responsibility that will come on the shoulder of industrialized country to finance developing ones. So to conclude, we can say basically that we have a lot of volatility and kind of contradictions in terms of how the US positions itself within climate change governance, being ambitious but very hard at the same time and accepting absolutely no constraints. And clearly, as something that we'll discuss now, the US administrations testify a lot of swings, with Trump coming on in 2016 and coming on again last year. And I want to turn now to discussing what were the key differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2, because there are really important ones. So in 2016, Trump also decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. So it's something that we've seen. However, this was made more kind of as a political act. The fact that any kind of actions, decisions that were made by the previous administration were to be dismissed. So it was more of a political gesture. But this has really changed under Trump too, the second mandate under which he has come into presidency. They have been much more prepared, much more efficient, and much more coordinated in how they have approached climate change governance and the erasement of climate change governance within public administrations in the US. And this has clearly been exemplified by a public discourse that is centered on climate change backlash, one that is outrageous, the complete refutal of climate change science, the erasement of funding for many scientific programs, also firing a lot of persons responsible for scientific and climate change science in administrations and in scientific programs. So there is clearly an effort to silence climate change within, but, and this is a very important but, also outside. The US is really trying to silence as much as possible climate change from international discussions. And they have adopted some kind of a red line strategy where climate change ought to not be mentioned in any type of agreements or any type of discussions coming out of course, UNFCCC, but also other forums, the G7, the Maritime International Organization, the UNGA. So we really see a complete effort, a really organized one to erase climate change from discussions, and they are very hard on it. They are not there for compromising. It is a red line. And this is very much linked to what I would call and what experts have called the energy dominance agenda of the US under this administration. So The US is currently the first exporter of oil at the global level and the first exporter of natural liquefied gas. So two fossil fuel sources of energy for which they are net exporters. And this is very much important because the way in which the Trump administration has tried and is continuously trying to erase climate change from political discussions, from the international agenda is very much linked to that. It's very much linked to their effort to dominate at the international level through their energy policy. And this is also inscribed in a broader geopolitical context, one of US-China rivalry, where we all know the extent to which China is leading in terms of renewable energy technologies, in terms of its experts. And so this effort that the US administration is putting on basically rehabilitating fossil fuels as a legitimate energy source is inscribed also in this rivalry. That being said, it's important to underline that even under the Obama and the Biden administrations, the U.S. were still very much net exporters of fossil fuels. So it has always been at the core of the U.S. economy. And this is important to underline. There hasn't been a complete change of posture, but what has changed is, I would say, more the assumed and openly discussed discourse on fossil fuel as a legitimate source of energy. That being said, despite efforts made by the Trump administration to basically reinstate fossil fuels, to increase investments in new production sites, etc., we can say that the decarbonization of the U.S. will continue because actors in the sectors have already been invested, and this is also the case for the oil and gas sector, who has invested in the diversification of its portfolio. And so for them, the Trump administration is not completely stopping the decarbonization. Now, to finish, a few minutes coming back, of course, on what does this withdrawal mean for climate change governance. So we haven't observed the snowball effect so far. So that means that no other country has announced that it would withdraw from the Paris Agreement, although we have seen some concerning signals from Argentina and from India, but this hasn't led yet to any type of action. However, and this is very important, there is a huge erosion of trust in the climate change governance framework and landscape. This trust is very much at the core of the cooperation on climate change, where we have a system when each and any country is required, and there is kind of a sense of shared burden that we will all commit. So it is very much impacting that. And I would say a second point that is really, really important is the extent to which the US withdrawal will impede the financial capacity to act on climate change and the climate finance goal. So at the last stop, there were what we call a new collective quantified goal that was adopted that is set to provide $30 billion annually by 2035 to developing countries. And for sure, the withdrawal of the US, the fact that it will not provide any type of financial support to this goal is going to be a real challenge for other countries, notably the EU and other developed countries, to reach that goal, and by reaching that goal, to reinstate the trust and to basically show that they will commit. And the last point I want to highlight, which I think is very important, is the influence of the US also in other forums. So they left and they are leaving. They'll still be legally in the process until January, where they will formally leave, but they will be present in other forums. And climate change is very much governed in different kind of regimes. And we will see, I think, many efforts from the US administration to block and impede any type of progress also in other forums. So yeah, some compromises might be necessary. I will stop here for the presentation. I hope I haven't been too long, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Sofia, for this very clear and precise I will say, element regarding the backlash of the Trump 2 administration regarding climate change, and taking into account so many aspects which show a kind of ideological position, but also the fact that there is a kind of witch hunt against scientists dealing with climate change, but also the fact that within some international fora, I have in mind, you mentioned the Maritime International Organization, and greening the maritime transport is one of the priority of this organization. And according to the role of the US in the international transport, maritime transport, it's going to be really very challenging. But I'm sure we will have a lot of question to explore more this aspect. I turn now to Professor Takamura to call you. Hello. So
Hi.
the floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. First of all, thank you very much, for inviting me. Such a wonderful event, especially focusing on the international cooperation and the climate change, the after the change in the U.S. climate policies. So, I just a minute. Maybe I made mistake. I'm sorry. I tried to share the screen.
Yes, we saw your slide.
Yeah,
Yes, it's okay.
okay. Yeah,
It's
thank
okay
you.
for
Thank
us.
you very much. Thank you for your confirmation. So, my presentation is the based on the Sofia's presentation and the focus on the Japanese climate policy and diplomacy after the change in the U.S. government. And also I try to suggest some prospect for cooperation. I mean, to drive the discussion after the three presentation, hopefully. So to start, the current status of Japanese climate policy. In my view, there is no significant change even after the change in the U.S. climate policy. As you may know, that we already submitted 2035 NDC and the 2040 NDC as well. It was already last February. And these 2035 and 2040 NDCs, national reduction targets, are set aligned with net zero by 2050, a long-term goal, and a pathway toward achieving 1.5 goal. So I just show the current, the table or for the submitted NDCs. I was just informed through the news information that the EU agreed, among environmental ministers, the 2040 reduction target, the 90% below 1990. But I like to maybe listen to that, from Mathilde. So our NDCs, as I say, that it's quite a straight line towards the net zero by 2050. It is almost within the how can say, the range of 1.5 degree global pathway. Why we didn't actually change significantly our climate policy? I think we have. I see the two reasons, especially for the Japan. One is that the Japan's climate policy, I could say that has changed since a couple of years. Its objectives, it's of course it's to protect the climate system, but also we try to drive the economic growth and development through climate policy and to achieve green transformation. We called it GX. So this actually, this policy, I mean, green transformation, GX strategy and policy are very much, the suggested, started, in my sense, with a suggestion from the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States, as the Sofia mentioned, and also the EU Green Deal. So the this GX policy started from the February 2023 with the cabinet approval of the basic policy for the realization of GX. Actually, this document show that the what the green transformation mean for the Japanese policy. So it's clearly climate policy because the GX aim to transform our we change the energy we from the fossil imported fossil fuel to the clean energy. But at the same time, we seek to transform our industrial and social structure, toward the decarbonized structure. So with that, we could ensure that the stable supply of energy, and also try to have here the English word from the government is dramatic bounce back to economic growth. So you can see from here that the GX policy, which is of course the climate policy, but also it is industrial policy and also economic growth policy. So that's why the even after the change in climate policy of the United States, we have no at this moment the incentive to change the course of climate policy. So I say that we submitted that 2035 NDC and 2040 NDCs. It is well submitted. It's after the Trump administration gained the power, get the power, but this course, I mean, schedule had not never changed. It's I think a good example that show and that no significant change happened. I mean, the surrounding the Japanese climate policy. So as already say that the climate policy, I mean GX policy is not all GX policy is not only a climate policy, because the one of the reason is that our energy sufficiency rate is very much low compared to the other developed countries. So that means that we had a very severe experience that after the Russian aggression to the Ukraine, we had a very severe situation of energy supply, and the energy price hike of energy. So then it's actually the unstabilized our economy and of course our life. I mean in Japan. So how to then improve such situation and energy system? So that is one of the motivation. And the second is that how to then stimulate the economic growth by the stimulates the domestic investments towards the decarbonization. So we have already the strategy here that increasing energy, renewable energy, and make a use of nuclear energy, and also the make innovation of the new energy such as hydrogen and ammonia or CCS and e-fuel or whatever. And very late compared to the European Union, we have finally decided to introduce the emission trading scheme from the next year on. So these kind of variety of the policy had already put in place since 2023, so that the implementation of these policies still underway, and but are not change the course and the speed to implement them. So maybe I could add one thing, about the green GX policy is that it is a good opportunity to have a new market of the decarbonization. So already, as you may know, that even the United States is going to withdraw the Paris Agreement, but more than 140, and which covered the almost 80 and 90% of global GDP, is already pledged the net zero goal around the middle of this century. That means that if they really seek this goal, we could have expanding decarbonization market. And actually, in Asia, even here, excluding China, we can expect that the increase in renewable market, and also the say EV, electric vehicle market, and not since especially since 2 years, we see quite a strong increase in the EV in the market of the ASEAN countries such as Thailand and Vietnam and Indonesia. Maybe another reason why Japan had not a significant change, the not appetite to change the climate policy even after the U.S. Policy change. That is because now after the Paris Agreement, as Marianne said, that it is the 10th anniversary of the adoption of the Paris Agreement. After Paris Agreement, I think non-state actor and especially the company and corporate and the financial institution, their behavior are quite changed. In case of Japan, most of large company, listed company, already committed themselves without any governmental regulation to, the achieving net zero by 2050 at the latest. I hear cited like Hitachi and Sony and the major banking corporation is one of the case. And also, they do also commit themselves to reduce Scope 3 emission, as you may know, that emission from their supply chain and value chain, which actually have a very broad impact on the change in behavior of the corporate, including small and medium companies. So which means that how company manage climate issue is really getting a business risk and also the business opportunity. Climate policy of Japan, has now gained another important role to support these companies' transition for enhancing their competitiveness. So this actually, as you may know, that the international sustainability standard board established in 2021, and it's getting become an international standard. Of course, I know that the EU has a fast mover to establish CSRD. Of course, it is, I think, in the middle of the amendment, but this internationalized, the sustainability standard board, including climate-related disclosure standard, is now, become the mandatory in certain, jurisdiction. Especially, you can hear the many of the Asian Pacific region. And Japan is also, become this standard mandatory since the 2027. So that's that's actually the creator, the level playing field for the company to address the climate change. you can see already the the increase in the finance in the Asia Pacific region. Here they excluding China. That show that Asian countries also have a keen interest to how to create these business environment for the corporate transition or corporate integrating climate risk in its management. So I think that is the second reason why that the Japan are not, at least now, they have not significant change in the climate policy. Maybe moving the possible, the international collaboration and I just start to introduce the ASIC initiative. It is, you can see in the middle that it is attended by the Australia and most of ASEAN countries and Japan. It's the objective to make a transition toward the carbon neutrality or net zero society together while achieving economic growth and economic security and resilience. So we have three leaders and head of state level meeting, and just you may know that Japan has just changed the prime minister, but she already fly to join this statement to the meeting, and that show that the importance of the Japanese government to place on this international collaboration in the Asian region, Asian Pacific region, if I may. So that is one of the proof of that the Japanese climate policy has not changed at international level as well, because this is just published in the 26th October. The recognize as well the 1.5 degree goal and the unwavering commitment toward the achieving carbon neutrality. So that is, I think, one of the area that Japan could, foster to contribute to the decarbonization, not only, outside Japan. You can see that we have a very, sophisticated, if I may, the supporting system together with the participating countries. So not only finance, but also technical and also policy elaboration and as well. So I hope that that is a core, locomotive to decarbonizing Asian region. That's actually the facilitate the Japanese company, because this region is actually the market for Japanese company as well, and also the value chain location of the Japanese companies. So to the end, I totally agree what the Sofia suggested about the impact of the U.S. policy change. Then the maybe possible area for strengthening cooperation between Japan and France and through France and the European Union. First, it may be urgent topic is climate finance. That is actually agenda for COP30, one of the agenda. And also the looking at the current situation of the United States, how to enhance and protect the climate science and research. I think the already not only France and also Japan received the scientists in this field, but this climate science is very much basis for the international cooperation and agreement. So then how to enhance and protect climate science research. And the third point is we see already the collaboration between non-state actors and companies. I think facing the difficulty of the intergovernmental negotiation at this moment, I think more focus should be placed on the non-state actors level. I think now before in advance of the COP13, there is local leaders summit is actually occurred, taken place in Brazil, but how maybe we could enhance this level of cooperation. I just hear the already I see the collaboration between company, a French company and Japanese company is the recycling of the PV module. So the AGC, Japanese glass factoring company, have a very good collaboration with Sangoban. So that's actually contribute to the enhancing the the resource security, because we very much depend on the import from the China in terms of the PV module. Last not least, how we could create a leadership to enhance the international collaboration. I think that is a core element of the collaboration between Japan and France and European Union. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Takamura Sensei, for this presentation, which give to us a deep light regarding Japanese climate diplomacy. I've noted, for example, the ASEC initiative. I'm not sure that our audience who's aware of this initiative, which include many ASEAN partners. And it's good to have ASEAN, for example, the very dynamic ASEAN countries in the picture, of course. And it seems to me that Japan is the go-between by definition, which can help to involve all of these ASEAN countries. And we very much appreciate your mention of the cooperation with Saint-Gobain, which is a very well-known and ancient and traditional glass manufacturing, French glass manufacturing. So there is already cooperation going on, and maybe we will have to think to add some more, I will say, more link between our companies. So thank you for putting them also in the picture. Now moving to Mathilde, just to have a complete view and to include France and EU about diplomatic and orientation when it came to climate change. So the floor is yours, Mathilde.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you to the two previous speakers. Both of your presentations were very enlightening, and so I will try to complete what you have said about the US and Japan, and I will try now to give you an overview of France's and the EU current diplomacy. I will try to do this in a timely manner, but the picture is broad, so apologies in advance if I cut short on some topics. So I will begin by offering an overview of France's climate diplomacy by first doing a brief review of the key periods of France's climate diplomacy. I will then present the national climate policies and commitments. But yes, as I was saying, the third point that I will address is presenting the current role and diplomatic challenges that France faces. And I will then do the same for the EU. So it's a big program that we have ahead for the 20 next minutes. So first of all, I will speak about the key trends of France's climate diplomacy, because to understand France's current position, it's useful to trace back to the gradual construction of this diplomacy that can be categorized in three big phases. So first of all, by the late 1980s, actually, beginning of the 1990s, France had already fully joined the global movement for climate awareness. And more specifically, between 1988 and 1999, it already showed some strong political and diplomatic will. It started setting quantified emission reduction targets, speaking about carbon tax, and contributing to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, so the UNFCCC that we have already discussed in this session. However, this momentum soon slowed, and we can see already in the 1990s that in part due to some major oil companies lobbying, that kind of pursued a parallel diplomacy using industrial lobbying and disinformation. These ambitions were tempered, and the ambition plans were maybe a bit weakened. So that is kind of the first phase. We have then a second phase that we can identify, which is a phase where France leadership kind of was more asserted, beginning of the years 2000 to 2015, so to COP21. And basically, during the years 2000, France increasingly positioned itself as a key actor in international climate diplomacy, and successive French leaders consistently called for greater ambition in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This engagement basically led to a defining moment, which is COP21, which happened 10 years ago here in Paris, where the agreement was adopted. And as Marianne said, we set this goal of limiting greenhouse gas emissions to 1.5 degrees, and maybe 2 degrees if we couldn't manage 1.5. And then we have this kind of turning point post COP21, where France continued to embrace this climate leader role, but also faces new and different challenges with regards to the actual implementation of the Paris Agreement, which I will talk about a bit later on. So first of all, what are the French climate policies and commitments that we have today? So domestically, France has built a strategic framework to structure its climate action, which is based on its carbon neutrality goal by 2050, which is really the backbone of France's climate policy. And it's also based on different frameworks. I will cite two of them, not to be too exhaustive. But we have the National Low Carbon Strategy, which sets basically ceilings or carbon budgets that should not be exceeded. And the third national strategy, the third one, targets a 50% reduction in gross emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. We also have another strategy, which is called the Multi-Annual Energy Plan, which also defines the government's energy policies over a 10-year period. We do still have remaining gaps, since between 2015 and 2019, France exceeded its carbon budget already, which shows that it still has, of course, some consistency issues, which are problematic because it clearly undermines this leadership role that it wants to play and the international credibility, and its ability to have this leader position. So what we have today in terms of French climate diplomacy in the face of the US and in the face of Trump II administration, basically in the recent years, France's position has been closely linked to the policy implemented by Emmanuel Macron, who initially actually had quite a climate leader image. In fact, during Emmanuel Macron's first term, France launched several high-profile initiatives. The One Planet Summit, for instance, with the slogan "Make Our Planet Great Again." It also supported climate-related trade regulations, financial initiatives for developing countries, which all these efforts were highlighted by the UN Environment Programme, which named Macron Champion of the Earth in 2019. I don't know if that's the correct English name, but at least he got this recognition. And this first term of Macron and all these initiatives coincide with Trump's arrival as the new president of the United States. And at the time, we can see that it was a way to develop a French position as opposed to the US, and create a position of France as a guardian of the Paris Agreement after the first withdrawal of the US of the Paris Agreement. Of course, many analysts saw this as more symbolic, as a narrative that was being put forward, but that highlighted as I was saying, the inconsistencies, because after the US rejoined the Paris Agreement in 2021, France's diplomatic influence also decreased. and its international engagement became less visible. So the second term of Macron, we also see this same contradiction and continuity between the US and France, with again new initiatives. We had the One Ocean Summit, for instance, but again, many critics highlighted the rhetoric and the lack of action behind these initiatives. France was also condemned for climate inaction in its own court in 2021, which again kind of reduced its credibility in international negotiations. Another issue that we have today is that compared to the first Trump administration, it seems like Trump has a broader echo in France, and the backlash that is happening in the US seems to also be happening in France. And they seem to inspire kind of a reactionary push against climate action in France, but in Europe as well, which I will talk about later. US think tanks like the Heritage Foundation are collaborating with far right European and French figures to block, for instance, the European Green Deal. And so we can see that there is kind of an interconnection also, a transboundary environmental and climate backlash happening, which questions, of course, the coherence of the European climate action and the broader multilateral climate agenda. So looking ahead, we have the COP30 already happening today, but officially starting next Monday, which will be marking these 10 years of the Paris Agreement. So even though France has managed to build a reputation as a historic climate power that was actually capable of driving multilateral cooperation, it still faces some big challenges today. As I was saying, the domestic policies create a lack of credibility with regards to the international ambition of being a climate leader. It also has difficulties on staying a leader with regards to the European Union. And another issue is the polarization that is happening, that is impacting the climate policies. So after doing an overview of France, which I hope was intelligible, even though there was a lot of information, I will try to do the same with the EU, following the same structure. So brief overview of the key trends, presenting the ambitions and the policies of the EU, and then presenting the current role and challenges. So the climate issues actually entered the EU agenda quite early on, but more particularly in the 1980s, where environmental activism, civic action, and national debates kind of pushed environmental action into the European sphere. It was led by Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark, namely, that kind of found the EU as a way to export the green standards that they had already started to implement in their own country. France and the UK were also big engines of European climate policy at the time. Here as well, we can identify, or we can categorize, three main phases of the EU climate diplomacy evolution. So we have a first phase that is along the Kyoto Protocol date, so around the end of the 1990s, the beginning of the years 2000. And the Kyoto Protocol was again a big turning point because the EU successfully managed to conclude a binding international treaty on emission reduction. And at the time, the US had retreated, as Sofia presented, from this leadership role by retreating from the Kyoto Protocol, by not ratifying it. And the EU kind of stepped in as a savior of the Kyoto Protocol, which managed to help them project in themselves as a model combining economic growth, but also emission reduction and sustainability. We then have a period also of disillusion around the end of the years 2000, 2009, during COP15 that happened in Copenhagen, actually. where it was at a time when the EU had already grown. The number of EU member countries had grown as well. And this kind of was shown in its position in multilateral cooperation and climate multilateralism. And as a result, the lack and the incapacity of the EU to maintain a common front made that it was sidelining from the final negotiations of this COP. Learning from this experience, the EU then went back to a mediator phase, which some experts call, to kind of highlight the role that it had as a leader, but also as a mediator during the Paris Agreement phase and in these years surrounding the Paris Agreement. So the EU climate policies are quite numerous, but the big framework that we need to have in mind is the European Green Deal that was launched in December 2019 under Commission of President Ursula von der Leyen. And that's kind of the main framework to achieve the EU's climate neutrality goal. It focuses on all sectors of society: energy, mobility, agriculture, waste, etc. And it has several steps, several initiatives within this framework, which you also mentioned. The CSRD, for instance, is a big regulation of the European Green Deal. So whereas the current EU climate diplomacy currently standing at. So the EU today obviously remains a central player, but faces many international contradictions. Consensus amongst 27 countries on environmental policy is obviously very tough, and also participates sometimes to diluting some ambitions. We can see that the context here in the EU is also difficult. Just like in France and the US, we can see a tendency that deprioritizes climate and that targets the European Green Deal. We have been hearing about the omnibus package, which is basically a package that aims theoretically at simplifying some regulations, including environmental regulations. But in fact, this package is more specifically focuses on deregulating some key environmental laws and regulations that were really making and creating this European Green Deal. So we can see that what happens in the US, what happens in France, is also transcending and being translated into the European Union with key ESG disclosures like the CSRD that are really being lightened and weakened by this omnibus package. As a result of that, being a strong player, being a strong climate player is increasingly tougher and more challenges. We can see it with regards to COP30, namely, where basically all the EU states are supposed to have the same NDCs, so the same nationally determined contribution. But European countries really struggled at agreeing together on this NDC. And what is interesting is that they actually published, or not published it, but they announced that they finally managed to agree on an NDC this morning at 10 Paris time this morning. And they managed to reach an agreement focusing on a minus 90% emission reduction target by 2040, which is a good sign because it shows that the European Union, even though it faces some backlash, some internal backlash in terms of climate regulation, the EU is still not following the path that we're seeing across the Atlantic, and it's reaffirming its ambition to be environmentally ambitious. Although, of course, these ambitions are not ambitious enough, as we can see. This goal still remains light. It has been also qualified as weak because it holds many flexibilities, a very diluted wording. that kind of questions the effectiveness of this goal. So as a result, finding this goal for COP30 is essential, because not having a goal would have been extremely problematic in terms of European climate diplomacy, in terms of credibility, in terms of capacity to actually voice some ambitions during the COP. So it is good, but there obviously still remain some big challenges. And to do that, the European Green Deal needs not to be affected and needs to be achievable. And the ambitions of this European Green Deal needs to stay. So the ambition needs to grow, of course. They're never ambitious enough. So I would say that this is, my last point. And basically this trend that we have where the US is withdrawing, where we're seeing in Europe, in France, in Germany, some agents that also have this discourse on environmental backlash. We really need, the European Union really needs to take the opposite way and create maybe new alliances or strengthen some alliances and cooperation avenues with Japan, for instance, to counter this narrative that we are seeing. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mathilde, for this very enlightening presentation. With our three speakers, we had a tour de table of major actor. Although we didn't mention a lot about Latin America, we didn't mention Canada, we didn't mention a lot of other, I will say, interesting countries which are involved in this climate change policy and diplomacy. But I think we had enough element to go through maybe a more in-depth discussion and to come back on some aspect and going further in the commentary regarding what could be the day after. And the day after is clearly a situation let on the ground after the withdrawal of US and the fact that we are still measuring the negative impact. And precisely on it's you, Takamura sensei, which mentioned the field of research and the fact that even at a very institutional level and governmental level, there are still policy initiatives that Japan is involved. EU, France has always some ambition. There are some specific fields which are suffering of this kind of wave of climate skepticism, and of course I think that the research and the scientific community must feel very directly attacked and could be very disappointed looking at some country to be a welcoming country to continue the research. And so maybe I will ask you a question about the public opinion and the role of NGO, because we stand at a very institutional level explaining the position of the major actor, although we didn't mention everybody, as I already said. But what about the role of NGO? I heard that there was a kind of bitterness on the side regarding the challenge still ahead, and the fact that they consider that a few have been accomplished since Baku or the precedent COP. And there are also some disappointment regarding the organization of the next COP. I heard that a lot of NGO were short of funds, so not being enough support to find a way to share their agenda, to take the floor, or to represent some maybe local communities. So I will ask you for what is your feeling about the role of NGO, in the perspective of the next scope. How, of course, regarding US, what is the, I will say, the global state of the public opinion? Is the public opinion in America following this backlash, and what is saying the Trump administration, which is very ideological and very violent when it came to go after the scientists and going through a hand twitch. And what about the public opinion in Japan? Is there difference between the official position and what the main NGO, are they enough active? Are they influential in the process of defining the climate change diplomacy? Did they have their say in the Japanese agenda for the forthcoming COP? And I will add also this question regarding France. We heard about, making our planet great again. It's something very personal in the posture of President Macron. We are talking about the Paris Agreement, so we feel deeply involved for many reasons. But what about our main NGO and the public opinion? Do they consider that they had something to do to add, how influential they are? And not to forget the EU main NGO regarding climate change. So I will go and let you take the floor in the same speaking order regarding this first round of question. Thank you.
Yes,
So, Sophia, if you want to begin, yeah.
yes, sure. Thank you. So regarding that question, I will just start with highlighting. It's true that we didn't mention it, but the Paris Agreement is also very specific in how it changed the architecture of climate change governance in terms of its requirement for countries to voluntarily submit their contribution. But it's also very interesting because it also basically is structured to also involve other actors, those from civil society, but also the private sector, scientists, collectivities at the national level. And so I said this because, yes, the US public stance, the ones of the government, is very hard on climate change science, and hard is a light word, but there's always but, and societies are complex. We can see both under Trump 1 and Trump 2 administration that there have been coalitions that were formed to counter the Trump administration. We can talk about America is All In, or the US Climate Alliance. So there are some alliances of governors, of mayors, that together basically take the counter stance to show that no, there are many within the US that are still in favor of climate change governance, that are still aiming for net zero by 2050. So there is a counterpole that is less visible, less heardable, but it is very much existent. It has been existent also under Trump 1 administration. And within that, NGOs also play a central role, but it's true that the Trump 2 administration, due to its very hard policy and its cutting for funding on many initiatives, both within the scientific community, but also those targeting NGOs, are having a huge effect on their capacity. NGOs are often reliant on public funding. It's not always the case that it's come from the government. There's a lot of philanthropy occurring also in the US, and this will continue. There will be a counter kind of powers coming in to show that the US is still in. Now, with regard to the public opinion. So, as Mathilde say, something that is really structuring of our time is the increased polarization of our society, especially regarding climate change. And this is clearly visible in the US as well. So there is a portion of the population that is clearly in favor, in support of the Trump administration stance on climate change, the idea that climate change is an hoax, the idea that climate change governance is made to hinder the economic activities in the US and the capacity of purchase of the US population. So it does grow in the mind of some population, and it is having an echo that is quite important. But there is also the other side, where there is, I mean, the US is the leading scientific provider, of scientific data on climate change, right? They have the best models, they have the best scientists in that regard, and this is why the Trump administration is having so much impact on climate change governance, is because the US was a huge player. They have a lot of capacity, and it will definitely hinder it, but it will not stop it. The US scientists, they are also going in other countries to continue their work. They're developing strategy to save data on hard drive so that it's not erased. They are basically evolving also with the context within which they are working. And in the public opinion, we have, of course, a lot of support for this, and that is very much visible. And we can see with the new election today of the Democratic mayor of New York, that there is also a political direction that is countering Trump's direction. So the public opinion is divided, as it is in many regions in Europe and elsewhere. And it's not, and I think this is something I want to highlight, climate change is really not isolated from other social and political dynamics. And so it's really being kind of eaten or kind of taken through the big polarization that we see in the public debate, in the political debates, with the rise of the far right that have very strong counter discourse, especially on renewable energy. So yeah, all of this is very much linked. I would say. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia. Moving now to Yukari-san.
Marianne, thank you very much. I think you pose a really excellent question, because they highlighted, insisted that the, Japanese climate policy had not changed, or at least significantly changed. But also, I have to say that there's a couple of concern or the uncertainty involved in the Japanese situation. I think one is the change of the government. As you may know, that the no single political party has not the majority in our parliament now. So I think such kind of a thing happened now in some of the European country as well. So that means that the very difficult to agree a political consensus sometimes, and then how to then make the policy consistently in terms of the DX policy or climate policy. That is, I think, one thing. And the second concern or challenges is that now the populistic parties are getting more votes. That is also happening in everywhere in the world. So they often the advocacy lack the long term perspective. So often the climate change is maybe out of their policy agenda. So that's I think that's why the Marianne question. I mean, how is the public opinion and the NGO, or what kind of role could play in Japan, is very much important. Actually, that's these two challenges involve that the public opinion is somehow unstable situation. Of course, the non-governmental NGO and also some corporate are actually doing very good activity, including some litigation for the Japanese government permit and the coal-fired plant or the large emitting companies. So that's involve the lawyers and the expert researchers. That's, I think, the good the aspect, but still I have to say that compared to European countries, our institution are not really guarantee, not really equivalently guarantee the right or the participation in the political policy making, if I may. So I think we have to then these challenges we have to actually overcome. And especially recently, I have to say that as Sofia mentioned that the decision of the public and often make disturbed by the misinformation and disinformation. So how to then provide the at least the right, not to misinformed, not provide the misinformation, disinformation. That is, I think, one of the very important role of of course our university and the expert and also the institute like IRIS. I think we need some kind of collaboration. That's why they focusing on the science and research. So the last point, that's the for COP30, I think we have already, of course, always a lot of agenda. COP30 have to, discuss the finance and also NDC and the emission gap, and also the deforestation, forest protection and others. But I think the most important thing, based on, in light of what's the current situation in Japan as well as other places of the world, I mean, COP30 strongly sent a signal for the importance or the unwavering commitment for the multilateralism. I think that's what actually the Mathilde highlighted. But unfortunately, at least at this moment, there is no such a strong movement coming from the Brazilian, presidency, maybe. That's what actually we have to push the presidency, together with other country to make it happen. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, I let you, Mathilde, have some few elements to add.
I will add a few elements and try and complete what both of you have very interestingly said. But indeed, it's a very interesting observation because we're seeing that civil societies and NGOs are being attacked in many different ways. We can see that in the US, they're being silenced, they're being fired from places, so they don't have a voice anymore. At COP30, even though it's happening in Brazil, they do not have access to COP30. There are big issues on finding places where to sleep. And basically, organizations that don't have money cannot afford to go there because it's too expensive, because there's no place left. So there's a question of access. There is also, we can see in France, bigger and bigger, there are some more attacks, legal attacks against climate activists that are also being targeted. So we can see that different ways are being used to weaken the top bottom up actually system that is trying to be put in place. Nonetheless, I think that it's still very strong. I think that the efforts that we're seeing today, even though we're in this backlash context, I think that the efforts that we're seeing are mostly in part thanks to civil society and NGOs. And for me, they have big agency, even though they're being targeted on two fronts. They're less visible, so we cannot see it, but their work remains. First of all, in terms of, as we're saying, more in terms of like research. So the research continues. They're still highlighting some of the topics that we need to investigate on. In the US, for instance, where key databases were just shut down, the same people that were working on, the same scientists working there created parallel databases. So it's just less visible, but they're still doing the work. And it's more based on a ground approach, I would say. It's just less vocal, basically. In terms of the EU, I think the activism is still quite efficient because it's transnational. So it's also, there is an alliance of European countries alliance. So I think this should also not be contained to the EU. I think we should also build on this. We should build on transnational activism, which is being done, on alliances of the civil society that creates a kind of counterforce or opposing force, at least, to current government's ecological backlash. And there are also new strategies, new strategies and plans that are being used by civil society. One of them being having a bit of a more pragmatic approach, which I think is interesting, in, for instance, changing the framing of their narrative. So presenting climate not only as a problem in terms of environmental degradation, but also highlighting the security issues that it has. We're seeing it, for instance, the Green Party in the EU is starting to also investigate on the way we could securitize their framing, basically, and their narrative. So we're seeing that one of the strategies being put in place is kind of cross hot topics now, just like defense, for instance, and see how we can make it work with the climate emergency, basically. And I think that's interesting. That also shows the resilience of the civil society, of NGOs, in how they can adapt and how they still exist in the current context where they're being quite strongly attacked.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your effort to give us some hope and not let us with you see a grim picture regarding this forthcoming COP in Belém. Just to finish, I'm afraid we do not have so many time to save, but we had a very short question from the audience, which led us to come back to International Maritime Organization. Sofia, you mentioned yes, political action of Trump administration regarding IMO.
Yeah.
You have some more. Could you elaborate a little more about?
Yes.
And also regarding Japan, I have a question also on IMO and the decision of IMO to tax the maritime transport. If you can give us some light also, Yukari, please. Thank you. It will be our last question, and I will ask you to be as brief as possible. I'm
Yeah,
sorry
sure.
for that. Sorry for
No,
that.
of course. So just to come back on the IOM kind of events that occurred recently. So in March, there were negotiations occurring to discuss the reach of net zero targets within the IOM and the maritime sector, basically. So the text was finalized in March, but the vote was to occur in October. And what we see, what is important, first of all, is that it's a majority vote, so not a consensus one, right? So what we saw was that we had Middle East countries who refused to vote that, but what we've also seen is active maneuver from the US to pressure different countries not to sign that agreement, and basically pressuring them and threatening them of sanctions if they were to sign it. And so we see that's what I mean when I said there is a red line strategy, and they are being really hard, and they are not here for negotiations. They are, and this is actually a kind of concerning behavior to have at the international level, countries threatening another one of basically sanctions if they were not to follow their voting order. And so for now, it's on hold. I think it will come back to opening to vote in a year or so. So it's not over. But yeah, it's very concerning to see that the US is using its leverage. And that's what I meant when I say that the US is silencing climate change outside of the climate change governance landscape, framework of the UNFCCC. The IOM is a perfect example of that kind of effort.
Thank you, Gary. Do you want to add something regarding Japan and the maritime or imposition of tax on maritime transport? Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think it's a really excellent question. This kind of negotiation structure happened as well with the plastic treaty negotiation. But in terms of the Japanese position, I think Japanese government, also Japanese shipping industry, are really happy with this scheme. Not only levies, but also the road, if they could improve the fossil fuel efficiency so that now the Japanese government and the shipping industry already investing in the innovating the shipping, so that they are very happy, very much happy with this proposal. And I understand that the European Union and Japan had successfully the make a coalition to the save the this negotiation and just delayed 1 year and to make a more detailed regulation, and then we can negotiate again on this point. I think such kind of strategic collaboration and cooperation could possible and essential between two country. I mean, the Japan and France and European Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you, and thank you, Yukari, to let us finish on a very positive note regarding the future of cooperation. I also take your point regarding keeping contact within IRIS and keeping contact between all of us working on climate change and the observatory that Mathilde is leading here at IRIS. So thank you again for your contribution, and notably you, Yukari, because I know that now it's really very, very late. And I think it's dark over Tokyo, actually. So thank you, and I wish good luck, and I cross my finger regarding the forthcoming COP30 in Belém. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.